Hey, everybody. This is Razib Khan, and I am here with the conversation. We are conversation number 33, I believe. Right, Josiah?
That's right.
All right.
That's a
It's not
propitious
really
number.
33.
It's a
Yeah.
propitious number.
Is
The
it?
age
Yeah,
yeah,
that
might not,
Christ was
maybe had the.
crucified.
Okay. Yeah. Also, like, wasn't there the age that, like, Caesar cried because he was older than
that was
Alexander and he hadn't
30.
done anything?
That was
That was
30?
yeah,
30.
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Well, just to introduce, doesn't really need an introduction, but just going to introduce here with Ross Douthat, columnist for the New York Times. He has a new book called Believe. He's had a bunch of different books, a lot of books actually. Just go to Amazon at this point because I was like looking at it. I was like, my first book that I read of yours was Grand New Party in 2006. But man, you're like a book machine. Which we hosted you here in Austin during the Free Press debate, and everyone was like amazed at like how you crank out the books. But and you're
There
cranking out the columns. You're a one man content machine.
there first of all, they're short books and, just to encourage buyers, right? If you buy a book, you're not investing in some 700-page slog. I don't think I've ever written a book longer than, like, 275 pages. So
Yeah.
that's part
All
of
right. All right. So
part of the
yeah.
churning is keep the arguments tight, keep them moving, right?
Yeah.
Don't
Well, I
get
mean, just
bogged down.
You can
really
also
quickly. Yeah. Yeah.
I was
Go
gonna
on.
say
Go on.
the latest one I listened to on audio version read by the author, and
That's right.
so you
Always read your own books.
yes.
Well, I mean, you have a fantasy book that you're like releasing on a Substack, and we both subscribe to that. And I also listen to the audio version of that. So, that's another book
You
actually.
guys you guys yeah, you guys are completists, and that one, yeah, I'm worried I'm gonna fall behind on the audio of that book.
Just
It
yeah, you know
it
what though? You know what though? You're never gonna be a George R. R. Martin, bro. You might not be Brandon Sanderson, but you're never gonna be a George R. R. Martin. So you're okay.
Okay,
You
that's
just gotta
fair.
finish
That I
it.
appreciate it.
All right, so just really quickly, the privilege, Harvard and the education of the ruling class, 2005, Grand New Party, how Republicans win the working class and save the American dream, with Rehan Salam, 2008, Bad Religion, how we became a nation of heretics, 2012, To Change the Church, Pope Francis, the future of Catholicism, 2018, The Decadent Society, how we became the victims of our own success. That's 2021, or 2020. That actually came out right during the pandemic. You were doing your tour right before the pandemic. I remember that.
That's right.
The Deep Places, a memoir of illness and discovery. It's about Lyme disease. And now Believe, why everyone should be religious. So that's all the books. Check out the books, people. Believe is so I read it. It's short. It is concise. And I think one thing that I'm gonna say, like, you talked about the book. We're gonna go a little bit off the beaten path here, but just really quickly, I do want people to know um, this is not like I don't know, it's not like a book of like theological analysis. It's a very accessible book, the kind of arguments and discussions that let's just say like a college educated person should be able to have, but they haven't necessarily gone to seminary or they're not reading like objectivist atheist tracks because those types of arguments like, well, have you heard Norman Malcolm's ontological argument? Because that's just
Right.
so much better than St. Anselm's ontological argument. And those are discussions that certain virgins will have. We will not have that discussion. Yeah. I have read Norman Malcolm's ontological argument. Not gonna lie, I was a virgin at one point. I'm not anymore, so I haven't read it since I was about like 19. Okay, but
Let's just say there's a reason that theological disputation is historically carried on by, vowed celibates in my and Josiah's religious tradition, right? There's good
yeah,
reason for that.
all right, here's like I'm not religious. Like I'm the atheist here. I've never really been religious. I'm like my soul is dead. But I do have to say, like sometimes I hear like some theological prattle going on, and I'll be like, son, what the hell? I mean, it's just like there are all these religious people out there. They don't know what the hell you're talking about. Like, just shut up. You know what I'm saying? Like, maybe it's like important for you, and I understand for like the religious professionals. But I do think one thing that a lot of atheists of my bent, like hyper analytical kind of types, growing up, since we don't have the spiritual, emotional, communal connection to religion, we do hyperfixate on the analytical rationalist part, and we think reading Aquinas is like we get you now, you know. And it's like, I mean, ultimately, as I grown up and like matured, I do think that that is a slice. I'm not saying it's not a valid way to understand religion, but it's like a very small slice, and you really miss the forest from the trees if you focus on like this hyper analytical rationalist stuff where it's like how many angels are on the pins of on the pin of a head of a needle and those sorts of things. So that's
Yeah, I
that's
think
my
no, I think that's right, but I mean, and to your very kind description of the book, right? I think there's a middle zone between the people who say, "Oh, religion, it's just about practice. Orthodoxy doesn't really matter. It's just orthopraxy. Religion is just what you do." And there are some theologians speculating over there, but to understand, Catholicism, you just need to, watch people at mass and sort of think of it as a culture, not as a set of precepts. And I think that's overdrawn. I
Yeah.
think that most people who are practicing a religion seriously don't necessarily have a fully figured out theory of, the absolute and ineffable nature of God, and are not, are not reading Duns Scotus, right, on the side, and sort of arguing about voluntarism and, whatever else, right? Like I encountered someone on, on probably it was a Substack somewhere that I was reading at random, who was talking about their relationship to Catholicism. And they said, they had become Catholic or had been about to become Catholic and decided not to because they decided that Catholicism was wrong about, I think it was the impassibility of God, like the question of whether God can suffer. I don't remember, but it was something like that, right? Some, important but ultimately quite abstract theological point. And I was like, well, that's not normal, right? This is not how normal people approach religion. But I do think normal people want some kind of analytic framework for understanding why it would make sense to be religious. And I think this is why, the new atheists a la Dawkins were fairly successful, right? Like by attacking not the highest level of Christian theology or whatever, but by attacking sort of folk rationality, right? Being like, look, you have this sort of rational conception of who God is, and I'm going to point out holes in it and so on. And then the religious believers would sort of retreat and say, oh, well, you've attacked our, folk precepts, but have you considered, you know, Augustine on this, or hyper sophisticated theology? And I think that's too much of a retreat. I think the believer has to be able to engage, again, not at the hyper sophisticated level all the time, but at a kind of like, does this make sense kind of way,
Mhm.
and not just say, "Oh, bro, you gotta come pray with us, and then you'll understand." And there's also a tendency too, in the kind of Jordan Peterson era, right, for people to say, "Oh, Western civilization, it's too hyper rationalist. It's the left brain that's hyper rationalist. Is that right? And the right
Yeah,
brain
that's
that's."
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's not even true, but, like, that's
I
what
know, but that's
people
the
say.
cliche, right? So it's like, oh,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
too
yeah.
left-brained, and we need to activate the right brain and become mystics again. And I think there's some truth to that. I'm into mysticism and enchantment to some degree, but I think it's okay for left-brained people to say, "Hey, I'd still like an argument here," and that's sort of what I'm trying to supply.
Josiah.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I would also add that, one of the ways that people become interested in religion. I mean, a lot of people, it's something that they were brought up with. Some people, it's not something they were brought up with, but even if you're brought up with it, it can become a kind of like thoughtless routine type of thing. And one of the things that I think does get people kind of more interested in religious topics is this question of like, well, what does it all mean? What are we doing here? Whether it's, some crisis in their life, or, you know, just thoughtful moments, right? And, so it's about questions, and that's like there's obviously an intellectual element to that. You got to have, like, I guess for some people, and this is probably a bigger part of some other like Eastern faith traditions, or whatever, that part of the answer to the question is to just forget the question, right? And move beyond that sort of thinking. But that's certainly not the way the Western tradition has gone. And so I think for a lot of people, it would just be like unsatisfying. It wouldn't scratch the itch, if you didn't have something to say on this topics. And one of the things that I liked about your book, Ross, is, I mean, there was some stuff in there that I feel could have been in a book, 20 years ago during the new atheist debates about, quantum physics, or, fine tuning of the universe or whatever. But a lot of the stuff is actually, I think, new. It's more attuned to America now, which is more interested in, spiritual but not religious. There's a greater fraction of like people who describe themselves as spiritual, not religious, or who are interested in like non-mainstream topics, whether it's near-death experiences or faith healings, all sorts of stuff that you would not expect to be in like a standard respectable, new atheist critique from 20 years ago. So I thought that was, to me, that was like the most interesting parts of the book, I would say.
Yeah, I think the new atheists sort of took it for granted that they could just sort of sweep away, like, sort of arguments from mysticism, arguments from religious experience, right? And I don't yeah, I obviously don't think that's right. But yeah, I mean the book is trying to put together a sort of mixture of somewhat evergreen, though there are some sort of, there are sh- constant minute shifts in the fine tuning debate as
Right.
physics moves in different directions. And I'm sure I'm not fully up to date on all of them. But yeah, combine some of those somewhat evergreen debates with arguments about personal experience that I think are, I think they're relevant as a part of a rational debate. I think it's possible to have a rational argument about whether we should take religious experience seriously. I also think pretty clearly religious and spiritual experience is just a really big reason why religion persists, right? And so if you go back and read not all of the new atheists, but some of them, especially like I think Daniel Dennett in certain ways, right? You get this sense that like religious believers, they just have sort of these, they're making sort of structural mistakes in their thinking, right? That there's sort of an error, a sort of an error that you can identify in how they're reasoning about the world. And once we identify it, then religion will become naturally less appealing. And, that may be true for some people, but if you've had a religious experience, it's often hard to be then reasoned out of the idea that you should take this primary intense experience seriously. And I think, therefore, yeah, you have to sort of reckon with the resilience of that experience if you're talking about why religion persists and why we keep having these kind of arguments. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so, what we're getting, I think, across here, in this discussion is so, like, let's talk about, like, you're both Roman Catholics, and, Roman Catholicism has a deep, philosophical, theological tradition, analytical tradition that goes back to the Church Fathers, but also more recently, obviously, a lot of the Jesuits are trained theologians and whatnot. I think, Pope Benedict was, so there's, like, a very, very rationalist tradition there. Obviously, there's a mystical tradition, among many of the religious orders, but also among like Catholics as a whole. And then obviously the liturgy and the ritual. Catholicism kind of has everything, and different people I think can focus on the different elements. I think one thing in America that we have is like low church Protestantism, which to some extent, like say the Pentecostal variants, can be theology poor, kind of underdeveloped theology. They're like nominally orthodox, but it's not like hyper emphasized in terms of like their religious practice, and so they can be a little woolly on the details. Then there are people like I've talked to Lyman Stone. He's a Lutheran. I think he converted from like Methodism or something, but he's a Lutheran. I think he's Missouri Synod Lutheran, and he's very honest that he's not spiritual at all, like, he's kinda, like, dead to that sort of stuff. He's a hyper analytical Christian,
yep.
and, some of his, some of his, like, ticks online, like, I mean, in some ways, and, like, Lyman and I have talked about this, in some ways, he's more like a new atheist, except he just happens to believe that the rational, series of propositions leads to God, and I've met people like that, and so I think we need to, like, differentiate the different types of people. If you meet an atheist that's never had a spiritual experience, I haven't. Um, spiritual experience
Not
stuff,
yet.
like
The podcast isn't over yet,
That's
Razib.
I
right. And
haven't. Okay, yeah, yeah, not we don't want. Okay, actually, you know what? That would be good. That would be good because like you get some eyeballs, But like do an exorcism or something. But my
I
point
don't
is
I
like
don't think you're possessed, Razib. I'm not I
not
can't
yet, not
not
yet. You
gonna
don't know me
perform
well
an
enough.
exorcism. Go on.
No, but so it's like you have to use these different types of argumentation and understanding in terms of like kind of meet where people are, right? In terms of like America today, I do want to say, like Josiah alluded to it, it's in the book. You have to engage with the wave of secularism that happened after the year 2000. Really, it started in the late 90s, kind of like in the middle of Bill Clinton era, but like it really accelerated in the 2000s and the teens, and now it looks like it's leveled off in the last 2 or 3 years, and it's like stabilized. This was the second big wave since after World War II. There was a big wave in the late 60s that went into the
Yep.
70s, stabilized around 1980, and it was like, oh, it's all over. And then it happened again. This seems to have happened among cultural liberals in particular, although it happened a little bit among conservatives too. Everyone kind of changed, but really, it was like a big secularization. I was a kid, when we were kids, uh, atheism was kind of weird, associated with communism. A lot of people were nominally Christian. You know, they were like nominally Methodist or they were Presbyterian. Maybe they would go to go to church on Christmas, you know? I think a lot of younger people, Zoomers, younger millennials, they don't remember this. They don't remember this normative Christianity, just kind of like as like the background of our culture. Now our culture isn't necessarily super secular, but it's not also super Christian. It's kind of like undefined. And, you know, you have people like Bernie Sanders who almost won the Democratic primary in 2020. Quite clearly, he's an atheist. It never became a big deal. You know, it would have been a big deal 25 years ago, a generation ago. You
Yep.
know, like Democratic candidates had to be like Bill Clinton, like is probably sincerely religious. He's definitely a sinner. So we
Yep.
definitely
He
need.
likes he
He
likes the
definitely.
forgiveness part. He's into it.
Oh yeah, he does.
He's
Got a
into
lot to
forgiveness.
forgive.
So
Yep.
A
do
lot
I.
to forgive.
I
Yeah,
mean,
you know.
it's part of the pitch.
And so we live in this different culture, and it's like, you know, Rod Dreher's talked a little bit about this, and I actually, like, wrote about this, like, 20 years ago, and I think you linked to one of my pieces once when you were at the Atlantic. You know, I feel like it's almost like we're kind of, like, reversing the Roman Empire's trajectory, where, like, we're going from a Christian normative monoculture, and now it's kinda, like, shattered, and now Christianity is one of the dominant sects, but there's, like, other people out there, and so Christians like you have to figure out different ways to argue because I think you said this in the book, but it's like a lot of people don't even know the arguments for Christianity. Whereas if we were boomers, we would all know because you know everyone would have some connection to Christianity, even if not directly, like through their parents, right?
Yep. Yeah, yeah. I think we have, it's not a dominant cohort, it's not the majority, but I think we have a mass cohort for the first time in American history, really, that has minimal direct experience with any kind of religion. And some of those people are more interested in religion right now than the people a generation ahead of them. Like, I think there's clearly a little more interest in religion among Zoomers than among millennials, in part because with millennials, you have a lot of people who had a thin attachment and explicitly cut the attachment. Whereas the next cohort, it's like, hey, what is this what is this religion thing anyway, right? And that's yeah, I'm sort of the book is in part pitched for people in that category. It's in part pitched for people, and I feel like we all probably know a bunch of them who are sort of people in the intelligentsia who've sort of decided actually maybe secularization wasn't so great. America doesn't seem calmer and more rational and more scientific now than it did 20 years ago. But they feel like they can't actually get back to real religion because it's unreasonable. So
Yeah,
I'm writing a bit for them. But also, yeah, to your point about Lyman and hyper rationalism, right? Like, the claim of Christianity is that it is for everyone, right? That is the claim. And if God exists, I think it's fair for people to say, well, religion should be for everyone, right? So it should be that you should be able to make arguments that are appealing to the mystic, the Gwyneth Paltrow woo embracer, and also to the person who doesn't have direct and isn't really interested in having some kind of direct exotic experience of God. And I feel like I'm kind of a useful personal bridge between those different groups because I grew up with parents, especially my mother, who were like having intense experiences, were in charismatic Christianity, having like I watched people have religious experiences as a kid. And it was not, I think, what a kind of secular cliche would have it. Like it was something, whatever it was real. It was a real distinct kind of human experience that is not, I think, adequately reducible to, mass hysteria or like perfume in the air and rock concert vibes. It was something much more dramatic than that. But I myself am not really an experiencer. I've had some like things at the margins that you might call an experience, but I wouldn't strongly characterize them that way. So I feel like I can sort of talk in both directions. Like I take experience seriously. I'm interested in it, but I'm not here to tell you about the time that the Holy Spirit rushed into my heart and transformed me. Um, I don't know. Josiah, you said that you once had one core religious
I
experience?
I did, yeah. So I'm, for the most part, I would say that I'm in the same bucket as you, Ross, and that I think Peter Thiel once described it as, people will say that they're spiritual but not religious. He said he's religious but not spiritual. That probably kind of matches my overall temperament. But I did have one experience once, when I was in college. It's kind of very hard to explain, in words, but it was, I was talking with, a friend of mine who was Jewish, and he said that, he had to go because there's some Jewish holiday, which I should know the name of, that commemorates the, like, uh, fall of, uh, Israel
Haman?
to the to
Oh,
the
okay.
to the Babylonians, when Israel was, like, overwhelmed, and they were all carried off into the exile. This is what Lamentations is about, the
Right.
book of Lamentations. So, anyway, so I was like, "Okay, well, that's interesting. I'll read Lamentations." So I read Lamentations, and while I was doing that, I had, like, I mean, it wasn't like I it sort of felt like I left my body a little bit, but it was more like kind of like a inrushing presence, and I could kinda see, like, broader anyway, it was weird, I don't know,
Yep.
and the particularly weird, thing about it is that, um, the the message that I feel like I received from that, experience was that I needed to go to law school, uh, which I've told friends about this in the past, and they said, "Wait, if you were."
Are you sure that wasn't Satan?
Yeah, right. Yeah, this is not a. Maybe it was a supernatural power, but I don't think it was. But anyway, yeah. So I was not. I had been planning to go to grad school, which would not have been, in retrospect, a bad idea, probably for lots of reasons. But yeah, the day after that, I was like, well, okay, I signed up for the LSAT, and I still don't entirely know why God wanted me to do that. Although there's other things in my life that
That
are
have
like,
followed from that, right?
right, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
are you satisfied with the decision to go to law school?
Yes, I mean, my
Yeah,
life
well,
turned out very good, yes,
so there you go. It's
right,
good that you
yeah,
listened.
that's right, yeah, it is very good that I listened. So
But
so that I mean, yeah, so that was not like I didn't levitate, or,
right.
uh, breathe fire. I wasn't cured of cancer or anything,
Right,
so
you had a mixture of I mean, I think it's actually, not to be too much of a nerd, right? But I
yeah,
think it's useful to kind of categorize religious experiences, and you had kind of a mixture of what you might call like type 1 and type 2. If type 1 religious experience is just it's sort of a personal experience where either like your sense of boundaries sort of dissolves and you feel like one with the universe, or you feel a sense of like sort of almost the personal sufficiency of the soul, like your own immortality in some way.
yeah,
And then type 2 is like something from outside coming in, right?
right,
So it sounds like you were sort of blending those 2
perhaps a little bit, yeah,
a little bit, yeah. I mean, just to be, confessional, I've done the because I was, raised evangelical and people do this all the time. I've done the like browse in scripture thing, which is, of course, like terrible. You're just like tempting the Lord your God. You're like, I'm not reading the Bible. I'm just opening it at random and, asking
Augustine did it, right?
Augustine, right. Yeah. I mean, no, but Augustine was a much more prayerful man
Right,
than I
right,
am. I'm gonna be honest, like, I'm not doing this in, like when I've done it, it hasn't been in a spirit of, I'm gonna spend the day, like, fasting and praying and sort of prepping to try and receive a revelation. It's more like, "Man, I'm really stuck on this important life decision. Let's have prayer and open the Bible." I wouldn't say I've gotten consistent revelations. There was one important occurrence that I will not elaborate because it's too personal, where it did really feel like there was some kind of incredible relevance to the passage that I opened to. But the good atheist would say, look, it's the law of large numbers. If you do this, 5 times, you should get, statistically, you can get one where it's like weirdly, creepily apt for your situation. The Bible's a big book. It's a lot of interpretation.
could have been
Um,
open said, like, Samson slew however many Philistines or something, and then
What
Yeah,
do
I
you
mean,
think?
it was a specific name. It was, like, the name of the person in a story in the Bible that I had not been familiar with, which was unusual. Anyway, I wanna not I know you guys are notionally interviewing me, but I wanna talk to Razib as the atheist because
Yes.
I'm curious. One thing that struck me, so, that because I've done a lot of these conversations is, I in the book, I sort of present a kind of converging lines of evidence argument, right? So, you've got sort of your rationalist, like, look, the universe seems to be designed in these ways, consciousness seems to map onto the universe, and then you've got your sort of personal mystical experience arguments, and and then there's other arguments as well. And in conversations, it always seems like the person I'm talking to finds one thread of argument kind of interesting and another thread totally unconvincing, right? So you talk to Tyler Cowen, and you could sort of talk Tyler into some kind of argument from design. Like, I don't think Tyler is a full materialist. He's skeptical of materialism. But when you get to religious experience and, like, especially miracles, he's like, video and replicability or nothing, right? That's sort of his take. And then you go to Andrew Sullivan, and Sullivan is like, I don't buy any of the arguments from design. The universe is too big to be, it just seems too vast and empty for God to have made it for us. But personal experience is like the foundation of Andrew's faith. So I'm curious, like, if I was trying to tempt you, Razib, into being religious, is there any particular thread of the case for religion that, like, stirs at your rationalist heart, or is it all just sort of, do you greet it all with equal skepticism?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I've never had a spiritual experience, and so what I would say is, I'm not one of those atheists that was a real. I've tweeted this out and like I've written about this extensively, so people know they can corroborate. I realized I was an atheist when I was 8, but I didn't know the word until a couple years later. I just had like a flash, like, epiphany in the library, and I just basically in my head was like, "Wait, God might not exist," and then I was like, "Oh, no, I don't believe in God." 'Cause, I worked backward and I realized I would have told you that I believed in God when I was 6, but, like, I had, like, no model of God in the universe that normal religious people have. It was just like, my parents raised me Muslim, so I believed in Allah, but, like, it wasn't like a real thing to me, and I realized, like, it just, like, is not, so I don't have, like, an agent in the universe, and I don't necessarily have, like, spiritual interactions with other agents, with supernatural agents. I don't perceive them. So that would be, like, I'd be pretty skeptical of that. Obviously,
Why? So just
I ha
pause there. Why?
yeah.
You haven't had personal interactions with other agents in the universe, and therefore that leads you. Is that the core reason why you would discount other people saying that they've had these interactions? It seems too
Well,
weird that other people would have them and you don't.
well, I think part of it is, go back to Daniel Dennett. I think part of it is like most people have a much more agency detection than I do. I'm not, like I'm not gonna say I'm totally autistic, but I go into that tendency,
Right.
and so so for example, I've told people this. When I was in high school, I used to play jokes with my friends where, they would get scared in cemeteries and I wouldn't, you know, because like they
Right.
just
Because
felt
they
like
were
there was
they were
something.
they were wiser than you. Yeah. Yeah. No. No. I.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Right.
I am like
Right. No,
I'm
you don't
blind.
have. Right. Yeah.
I'm blind to a lot of that, right? And so, like, I think what it is like I believe that humans are evolved to actually perceive these agents, like to feel them, right? To have like an intuition about them. And I don't have that. And I've actually met other people that are kind of similar. There are other atheists that I've met who have those perceptions and they just like dismiss it as like eventually they just like explain it away, but they still
Right.
have them. I never had them in the first place. And so the spiritual stuff is like it's a little difficult for me because it's like trying to explain to a blind man how vivid everything is, right? Like you're like,
Right.
"Okay, like."
Right, right, so this is like the Pascal Boyer or Boyer or
Yeah, yeah,
whatever,
yeah, yeah,
right,
yeah,
right, it's
yeah,
like,
yeah,
humans have an overdeveloped capacity for agency detection, so we impute agency to inanimate objects, we think the tree is talking to we personify the
yeah.
lamp from IKEA, like that great IKEA ad, and then we apply this to the invisible realm, and there you have religion, right? And Paul Bloom has
Well, no, no,
eh,
I wouldn't say you have religion, I think you have a religious instinct.
your
The
religious
religion is built
instinct,
on
right.
top of that, right?
Right, but so that just, to me, Paul Bloom does has a version of that argument too, right? The Yale, now University of Toronto psychologist. But, like, that's different from religious experience, it seems to me. Like what Josiah just described, a pretty mild version of a religious experience. Like, I go and yeah, I have the agency detection model that maybe
Yeah, yeah,
not a
yeah, yeah.
super strong one, maybe I'm a little bit, little bit towards the Razib end, but, if I go in a cemetery at night, yeah, I'm gonna get some, like, heebie-jeebies or something, and if the weather seems weird in a day when it relates to my mood, I'll be like, I'll impute
Yeah.
something to that. But, like, if you don't have to have known someone, if you just, like, read William James, right? Like, when
Yeah.
people have, like, actual religious experiences, it just seems like a different kind of experience than, like, having your personification
Oh, yeah,
dial
yeah, no.
turned up,
I thi
right?
I think it is, but, like, I think the personification dial is, like, the atomic unit that those experiences are built on, and if you don't have the atomic unit, it's really hard to kinda grok those experiences.
But nobody's asking you to grok to, like, understand what it's like, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
well, where and I just I don't know, I would dispute that, right? Like, yes, the experiences where you a voice seems to speak to you, okay, you're personifying, like, random sound fluctuations in your head or something, but a lot of mystical experience is, again, like, the kinds that are not about, like, an angel speaking to you, but are about a feeling of your own position in the universe, seem like something else, right? Like, it's not hyper personified. And sorry, guys, I forgot to plug in my laptop, so keep talking while I
Yeah.
plug it in.
I guess, yeah, and, one question that I have with this metaphor of, like, if someone you lack this intuition, you said you're, like, blind to it, you might think of it as, like, you're colorblind or something, um, but if someone is colorblind, okay, that obviously is going to impede their ability to, appreciate types of art or fashion or other things, but it would be illogical for a person because of that to just say, "Well, therefore, color doesn't exist," and everybody else who says that they see it, they're not really seeing anything, it's not really there,
Yeah.
whatever, right? So, obviously, that would be it's a I do think it does seem like there are some people who just kinda lack this, uh, religious sense or susceptibility to, like, religious frames of mind to more or greater extent, and that's like a I would call it like a kinda handicap, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
but that doesn't
That's
mean
fair.
that yeah, but
But
so
okay, but let's use the color analogy because like that's a good analogy of like how I could be persuaded, right?
right,
So let's say I'm totally colorblind. I don't have cones. I only have rods,
right,
right?
right,
But like the thing is like the issue is like we know like how rods and cones work. So there's a contingent system
right,
um of like how, the cones are triggering in the brain versus the rods and how which types of animals have what. So we understand as a phenomenon in a systematic way that's like I think I'm going to use the word legible, which is common now to use, although like, transparent is probably just as equally relevant. So I can understand how color blindness works with spirituality. Like maybe I haven't read the right things, but
yeah,
I can't really understand how it works aside from what I'm describing, not, as opposed like, I think what I'm describing in terms of, like, the psychological naturalistic explanation is more plausible to me as a system for explanation than what you're describing right now. Does that make sense?
It does, but I don't think I just don't think there is actually a clear mechanism for how you get from the experience I have seeing something in the world and over personifying it to the even just the mild experience Josiah had. Like, is Josiah over personifying the Book of Lamentations? Like, what is he doing?
Yeah, I mean,
What is he doing?
I
Because the
okay,
thing
like,
with religious experience is it is an actual
so
experience. It's not something you
it is,
think,
it is.
right?
It is,
Right?
and the way I would say it is like, the way I would explain it or the way I would explain it to myself is it's not just perception. It's also there's like an analytic aspect, there's also a strong emotional aspect a lot of the time. So the way Christians, way Protestant Christians in particular, talk about the text of scripture, I have heard like, Hindus talk about the Bhagavad Gita in terms of like, okay, it's just a text, you're reading it, you're perceiving it, you're analyzing it, but there's like a very strong emotional connection, and that emotional connection tends to overpower. I mean, I don't wanna, like, divulge too
Yeah.
much personal information, but I'm not a very emotional person as well. Josiah knows
Except
this,
except when you're reading a Ross Douthat column and then
That's
the
right.
tears flow
Oh,
down your cheeks at the beauty, the limpid beauty. Um, all right, well, let's switch gear. Again, I'm sorry to hijack this, but so okay, so what do you think is going on in the structure of the universe? Like, do you think we're in a multiverse, a simulation? Like, what's your basic alternative to? So, from my perspective, there's just a lot of good reasons to think that consciousness in some form, you don't have to call it God, just say consciousness in some form has some primary role in the universe. And maybe that doesn't get you to classical theism, maybe it gets you to pantheism, maybe it just gets you to panpsychism. I think panpsychism yields pantheism pretty quickly. Once you
yeah, yeah.
stipulate mind in this way, you pretty quickly get to some kind of higher mind. But regardless, so it seems like that I think there's a bunch of different points of evidence in, fine tuning, in quantum physics, in the experience of consciousness itself that should give you a high estimation of the possibility that consciousness is not just epiphenomenal, that it's fundamental, right? And what do you think about that idea? And do you then, if you don't think much of that idea, do you then just buy the idea that there's an near infinite multiverse and it's just sort of spitting out material universes and a few contain consciousness and that's it? Is that where are you on those debates?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, the problem the I think where I am is, I do think, like, we're like mice in Plato's cave. So I don't really know, and, I wish I did, and I wish something would persuade me. Um, I honestly, I'm gonna be honest, I think a lot of religion is cope, and I also think the multiverse is cope. I think there is a big answer, and I don't think that, like, we are able to grok it. We are able to, like, figure it out. I just, like that's how I feel. So I'm just, like, kinda like,
Kind of
yeah,
defeat,
I
a little defeatist, isn't it? You know, first,
yeah, yeah,
you're
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
we've figured out a lot of stuff, right? Like your whole non-bloggy, well, blogging career, right, is devoted to explaining how we've basically figured out like the literal source code of human biology in all these incredible ways,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
We can split atoms, we can I mean, we can do a
yeah, I
lot,
don't want
right?
yeah, I don't wanna sound like Wittgenstein or something, but, like, it's just like, like, yeah, I do think that there's a miracle, but, like, I'm not gonna put, like, a definition on it like you guys or like traditional scientific materialist or like, David Deutsch would. Right? Like like I have read like a lot of the philosophy and I'm like, it's like in startups you have a stretch goal. I get the stretch goal and I'm like, "Oh my god, you are so short of the stretch goal in my opinion of like attaining it that I don't even know, man." So I know that's very unsatisfying for most people and it's kind of unsatisfying for me, but that's kind of where I am in adulthood because I have read, I mean, I'm pretty familiar with a lot of the religions. I know the multiverse. I have friends who believe in the simulation
Well,
and like,
the simulation, not to go down, but I mean, the
the
simulation
simulation's
just
like
leads you back to
yeah,
the
the regress, it's like the
it,
turtles all the way simulations all the way
right.
down or something, like,
And
what's going on?
it leads you, I mean, if we are in a simulation, then you are, I mean, this is what I said to Tyler, but it's still true. Like, you're still making, like, then you need a theology of the simulation. Like, you're in the grip of a demiurge or an
Okay,
archon, right?
yeah,
Right?
so here's what
Like,
I yeah,
someone
here's
has
what I yeah.
created you, and it should be
So what I
relevant
would
to you.
say is like yeah, what I would say is like there's obviously order in the universe that we can perceive. I agree with that, right? Like obviously, we're not like I'm not like a total solipsist or I'm not like a total like Pyrrhonian skeptic or anything weird like that. There's order in the universe. There's probably like I'll use the word ground of being, but again, I think our words are like escaping. They're like grasping at something we can't touch or we can't perceive. Like
Uh-huh.
you
So,
could call it God.
Aquinas would agree. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no. I mean, it's just like you you can call I just, like, do not like to use the words that people use because I perceive them all as probably almost certainly falling short of the truth of what is, but, like, I don't know, like, I'm just, like I accept that, like, I'm very ignorant, um, And I just think that, yes, there is a big answer, but, like, none of the answers that I've seen persuade me. Maybe someday they will, but they haven't. So that's, like, the reality. I mean, if you and I've thought this since I was about 22 or 23, because I did, like, read a lot of, like, philosophy and
Right.
religion and multiverse stuff, and I was just like,
Okay, but then
"Yeah, I'm happy
I mean,
people are doing it." It's just like, but it's just
I
like, no, like, we don't know.
okay, I'm not gonna well, then I'm not gonna tell you like, there's a tick religious people have where they're like, "Oh, you're really religious and you don't even know it," right? And I'm not gonna say that. You're not a religious person, but I don't think you're under those terms, you're not really an atheist either, right? You are actually the definition of an agnostic, right?
Yeah, that
Yeah.
is true. Like, this is again, like, when you drill it down,
So we've
yes, I
already
am.
told you just in this
Right.
No,
conversation,
no, no, no.
we've
But
made
the thing
some
is no,
real progress, Razib.
no, but the issue is when most people say atheist in the United States, they mean, like, "Do you believe in the theistic God?" As
Sure.
it's stipulated, right? And, like, I don't
Well,
believe
or
in any of those.
I think at this point,
No,
atheist
I was saying
implies you don't
I colloq
like ground like just using the term ground of being, you're already walking a little bit away from what I think colloquially people mean by atheism. I think people use atheism, especially now, like maybe 20 years ago when, as you said, the culture was more residually Christian, atheism just meant like not believing in the Judeo-Christian God. I think now the atheism means, you're a materialist, right? You think, it's all, matter all the way down, everything else
yeah,
is
okay, okay, wait.
phenomenal.
Okay, okay, so, but here's the issue, it's like this is what I'm saying, proximately, and I think we all are in some levels, it's just about, like, what remove. Proximately, I am a materialist, I do think, like, nature is, like, explicable in, like, order and rules and stuff like that, you don't need the supernatural. My point is, like, all the way down, ultimate, like, the ground of being, like, okay, like, I don't think we can say that, I don't think we know. I think, like, again, like, it's like we're looking through the mirror darkly, and I think the mirror is really fucking dark, you know? Whereas, like, you think, like, you can kind of perceive and, like, the church fathers or whatever, or, like, there was a revelation from God in your model, right? I
Well,
just,
those
like,
are
I don't
separate
believe.
things. I think you can I think
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
this
yeah.
is more what the book is concerned with. I think you can reason your way to the idea that mind is probably primary, and our minds have some kind of important and meaningful relationship to the
Yeah,
mind
yeah.
that made everything. And then, yeah, past that, you need to embrace or
Well,
not embrace a particular revelation. Yeah.
yeah, and, like, I'm gonna cop to, like, a fundamental thing that we're getting across here, and I think a lot of people who are listening to this, who followed me for, like, maybe, like, over 20 years are a little surprised. You believe in the power of reason in a deep way more than I do. Like, I think there are limits to our reason to comprehend the infinitude of the universe, like, whatever infinity means,
Hmm.
and that's what I'm trying to say, like, I see very like, I feel like we see very brightly, uh, this, like, core zone of our existence, more brightly than you do,
The light
actually,
cone.
yeah, whatever you wanna
Yeah.
say, like,
Right.
but then, like, outside of that, you think you have an understanding of that, that for me, it's total blackness. Does that analogy make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think reason can only give you a very basic understanding of what's outside the light cone, or it can only say again things like I just said, that there's probably intentionality. Our minds are probably related to the primary intentionality, and we should try and therefore, do things that our ancestors and all human cultures have done to try and get in touch with and align ourselves with whatever the cosmic purpose may be. I think it's really hard to reason to what that purpose actually is, and that's where experience, both religious experience, cultural experience, and revelation become important. Um,
Yeah.
but the idea that, yeah, I think the idea that there is intention and purpose seems, again, not it's not like I don't think there's an argument, people like the term defeating, right? I don't think the arguments in my book defeat the atheist materialist to, some 99.99 percentile level. But I think they're much more likely than the atheist materialist conception to be true, and that much more likely takes you, well past Pascal's wager into a zone where going to church makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, and also, like, I'm not one of those people who's, like, very evangelical about my atheism. Like, I just, like, I own what I believe. But like I think other people, it's fine. I think that there's actual social utility to religion, et cetera, et cetera. I think we've done the experiment. I mean, you were very explicit in the book and like in your podcast and stuff. Like Richard Dawkins in 2006, like, what if there was no religion? And I'm like, well,
Yeah.
What
what
indeed?
what
Yeah.
we kind of did try that before, Richard. Like I did say that at the time. And like we tried it again
Yeah.
a little bit and like like I have a friend of actually like I'll just like say his name because like he's kind of well Patrick Wyman, the podcaster,
Yeah.
like
Yep.
and like we had a conversation once about wokeness, and he was just like, you know, a lot of these people, it would just be better if they just, like, stayed in the Methodist church, and just, like, went to church on Sundays and were, kinda Christian and, like, did their energy put their energies that way. I'm not, like, a total believer in, like, oh, wokeness comes out of, like, you know, the exit of liberal Christians from their churches, but I think there's something there.
There's something, yeah, it's incomplete,
There's
but
some
it's a necessary part of the story.
there's something there because like when one thing that I've noticed is like like among the atheists there are people like me who are not super militant and like we never became woke either, but then, like, the woke ones were, like, also the ones that were God is not real. God is actually evil, and I'm like, "Wait, but he's not real." You know what I'm saying? I was like, "Wait a second." So it's like they inverted like, they're, like, anti-theists,
Right.
and then those people eventually became atheism plus, and then they became like, "Oh, like, like, we can like, choose whatever identity we have, and that is sacred, and it's genocide." Like, they started believing in, like, blasphemous words of power, like, you can't misgender someone. That's genocide. Again, like, that's, like, straight out of, like, common religious cultural playbooks of, like, taboo words and things like that. So it's like, they're like, "Oh, like, we're, like, all rational and reasonable," and then they just, like, got it all back through the back door without, like, the
Right.
traditional
Right.
religion.
Well, right. A certain kind part of the new atheism was a kind of liberal moral protest against the Judeo-Christian God, trying to use some elements of Judeo-Christian morality against God, saying you're not living up to your own standards in these various ways, right? I mean, Hitchens was semi-explicit about this when he would talk about God as like a North Korean dictator, right? Like even if there was a God, Hitchens wanted to be in rebellion against him, and so then yeah, then it's not surprising that those rebels would then try and reconstitute a kind of moralistic vision because moralism was part of their complaint against God in the first place.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, and so, again, like, there's different types of religious people, there's different types of irreligious people. One of the things that I think you've, like, talked about is, like, the rise of spirituality. I mean, honestly, I'm not saying, like, spiritual people annoy me, but it's like, I literally cannot, like, understand what the hell they're saying, at least, like, when you're saying, "Well, there's a triune God," and I'm just like, "Well, are you sure Athanasius is" like, I actually have a response,
Right.
whereas, like, spiritual people are like, "Can't you just feel the vibes?" I'm like, "No." Which is what, So I was like, for me, like, I actually, and I'm more on the conservative side, so I think like social order and structure is important. So I actually like really strongly believe like if I had to pick between the two, like society should be religious and not spiritual because spiritual people start to do crazy things. And like, you have like bacchanalias and
Right.
what I'm saying? Like
I
all of
think
like the
yeah, the
drugs and
vibes.
God and sex. Yeah.
Yeah, the vibes seem to me to give way pretty quickly to a search for like something more concrete, and that something is, it's like the spirit guide you meet while taking ayahuasca. It's yeah, it's like some kind, the weird rationalist cults of Silicon Valley, like the, UFOs, right? Like it's hard to stay in the vibes for all that long. If you don't want the high God, if you don't want Yahweh, you're going to start looking for the small g gods, which
Well,
goes to your point earlier about repaganization. Like America is in this weird place where we haven't like fully repaganized at all. And you would need something much weirder to happen to get to a point where the pagan tendency became in any way institutionalized, right?
yes. Yes.
We're along like Christianity under again, unless the UFOs come down, right? Or the AI God reveals itself. Pending that, Christianity is going to remain the main institutional expression of religion in America. And then you have these individualist tendencies that are pagan but not like formalized,
Yeah, yeah,
even
yeah, yeah, yeah,
except
yeah.
for like the
I mean,
Wiccans.
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah, we could call them like heathenry or something. It's like there's like a basal
heathen
religious.
is a great word actually.
Yeah, but it's just like because like pagan is like a used word that's used by people that are like Wicca or Asatru or something like them, but they don't like to call themselves heathen, right? Because that's just like kind of generic and pejorative. But really, it's just like if you're ignorant and like okay, so I've told this story before. Like I did a minor in like history in college, and it was actually like mostly German stuff. And so there was in Eastern Germany, in Prussia, in old Prussia actually. Uh, so this is when the Lutheran Church was basically a bureaucratic. It was an administrative system where they would assign ministers, the state would pay for it. Prussia would pay, right? There was a mix up. And there was a couple of villages in this isolated area of old Prussia that did not have a pastor for a generation. And, like, some accountant or someone did the audit was like, "What? Wait, what? We gotta send a minister." The minister shows up, and, like, all the people in the village are like, "Oh, like, we haven't had a pastor for so long. It's great. You could teach us, like you could, like, like, baptize our kids and everything like that." And they're like, "Okay." Like, and so the pastor's like, "So what were you guys doing?" They were explaining how, well, so apparently, at the end of, like, the summer, they would kill a bull and bury the bull so there was a good harvest.
Right.
And, like,
But
and the pastor was like
this isn't a universal human tendency, though. This is Germany, man. This is
Right.
like
okay,
this
no, no,
is it's like
this
in Japan.
literally
In Japan,
yeah,
when the priests went away, they
yeah,
persecuted the Tokugawas, persecuted Christianity,
yeah, yeah,
destroyed it. But the missionaries come back 300 years later, and the Japanese are still like doing Catholic things, right? So
yeah.
it really is a Germanic, like Nordic
Well,
thing to be
okay,
like,
yeah,
the priests are gone.
Right.
Time
Yeah.
time to go back hard.
no, but
Go
no,
back
but
hard.
the issue is, like, this is actually a Baltic practice that was, like, attested by the old like, the Lutherans didn't know at the time, but, like, the old missionaries, like, actually attested this, like, bull killing, practice, so someone remembered,
Right.
and so when the Lutherans disappeared, they're like, "Let's go kill the bull again," you
Right.
know? And, like, but the issue is they all still identified as Christian, but they didn't really know much about Christianity anymore, and they thought that this something had to do with, like, Jesus, and the pastor, like, it was a translation, but you can read the frustration, rage, and just, like, confusion as to what the hell is happening here. Because he didn't wanna, like this is, like, the late
Right.
1700s. You're not gonna burn down the village, but, like, he's trying to reason with these people. They're like, "Well, our parents said," and so my only point here is, like, yes, like, we have institutional religion, but it is dependent on a complex cultural system of like teaching and indoctrination and these stratifications and the priesthoods. Because like when you let regular people, like alone, like they can get really weird quickly, as we know in the United States.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, well, you have I mean, Mexican religion, you could argue, exists in this dynamic constantly, right?
Yeah,
That all of the Santa Muerte stuff, like that there's people will say, "Oh, well, Catholicism always sort of has pagan elements in it and so on," but there's a lot of variation from place to place. And it does seem like in Mexico, you have this perpetual dynamic between frankly pagan folk religion that adopts some Catholic practices and actual Catholicism. And, you'll
yeah.
talk to like priests, who work in small Mexican towns. And, these are the things I'm interested in because I'm interested in the weird stuff, right? But they'll be like, yeah, I keep telling my parishioners not to, participate in the cult of the death demon. But they do, and then they come to me, they're like, "Father, I need an exorcism. Things didn't work out the way I expected," right? So like that, it's not just that institutional religion can decline and weird things can happen. It's that you can have sort of parallel religious, practices and impulses in the same culture, which is itself quite interesting. Um,
All right, so we got 5 minutes before you got a jet. So let me just ask you a question.
yeah.
So your whole mean, basically your whole adult life has seen the decline of the religion that you are an adherent of, Christianity, even more specifically in the United States, Catholicism, right?
Yep.
And it looks like it has hit the bottom. Um, like, are you hopeful for stabilization? Or are you hopeful for? I mean, I think you have said you are hopeful for a revival. Like, are you think you're gonna see it? What do you think?
I mean, Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have written the book if I wasn't somewhat hopeful. And I actually think for once I timed the book decently well. The Decadence book came out just as COVID was going to put an end to decadence, right? That wasn't great timing. Um, I think the way to look at it is that America is sort of considering. We're not having a religious revival. We're sort of considering whether to have one. So I'm trying to contribute to that consideration. I think if you just run current demographics forward, the kind of plateau of belief and practice we're in right now will yield a new decline just through cohort replacement, right? Because, you know, boomers and some silents are still alive. They're more religious than millennials. They'll die. Millennials will take their place. The country will sort of, you know, in a secular trend, just become a little more religious that way. So if you were just saying project based on current numbers, you would say we've still got some more decline ahead of us. So you need some actual turns, right? You need some
That's true, that's
you
true.
need you need people to convert. I don't know. I'd say I would cop out and say I think it's sort of 50-50 whether in 15 years in the data you'll see something that looks like recovery and not just a plateau. I would bet where I'm bullish on religion is more on a 50 to 75-year horizon because I think we are going through this crazy population bottleneck caused by digital technology and its effect on culture, maybe above all, where lots of people are suddenly just not reproducing themselves at a novel rate, like a higher non-reproduction is just a bigger reality today than it was even 10 years ago. So you have these people like Eric Kaufman and others who would say 20 years ago, like, shall the religious inherit the earth? And they'd say, look, religious people have more kids than secular people. And so the religious people are going to win. I didn't buy those arguments a generation ago because I thought the difference wasn't big enough. And the secular people get converts, they convert some religious people. Religious kids grow up to be secular people, and so I thought any fertility advantage for religion was kind of running in place. Um, but I don't know. I think there's going to be a complex set of phenomena where it just becomes apparent that religion and religious community is really important to the resilience of human beings in an age where we feel kind of ordinary life can feel kind of obsolete. I think AI will contribute to this too. And so, yeah, not predicting like religious takeover, but I think you should be bullish on religious forms of community and social organization and family formation in this weird period we're headed into. Definitely bet on the Amish to keep growing, things
Mhm.
like that. But I think even just like normie but traditionalist religion is going to look like a pretty good technology for getting through
Alright.
the age of
Alright,
obsolescence.
I gotta really quickly though, AGI, is AGI gonna happen, and are they going to, crank through it so that they do the real ontological argument, and they're like, God exists, and then all of the tech lords will convert? Like, do you think that could happen?
Josiah, I'm gonna punt that one to you. I don't there was did you see Sam Altman? Sam Altman, like, retweeted, his AI becoming a Berkeleyan idealist and saying only
Oh, yeah.
consciousness exists,
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
right?
yeah, 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 yeah.
I
Which
mean, I don't know. I think there's gonna be a little more religion in Silicon Valley, but that's where I get into more sort of, you know, paranoid Christian fears, sort of C.S. Lewis, that hideous strength stuff, where I'm more concerned that like, the quest for AGI is a sort of occult practice at some level, and if you're getting in touch with something, it's not gonna tell you that Thomas Aquinas was right. It's gonna be, a different voice, not a positive voice speaking, but maybe that's too paranoid. That's more my religious concern around the Silicon Valley stuff is that it is a sort of implicit occultism involved, not an explicit
Alri
one, but a sense of like we're a spirit to tell
Oh,
us
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah, yeah,
secrets
no,
of the
I
universe.
totally I mean,
I'm just
there are
skeptical that
demons.
that leads to Catholic victory.
Yeah. Alright, we'll let you go, Ross. The book is Believe. Everyone get it. Like, I'll have that as the hero image, so click it, buy it,
Buy it,
read it.
read it,
Yeah,
and join at
listen to
least join Razib in provisional agnosticism, if not yet full belief. And
what I would say is there's big questions and big answers. I am not convinced of your big answers, but I am glad that you're actually putting yourself out there. That is always great. And so, the effort, I'm gonna give that 100%, even if I'm not convinced yet, right?
all right, I'll accept that, Josiah. In the rest of the show, just finish the work.
I will. Yeah, that's right.
All right, talk to you guys soon.
Thank you for
All
joining us.
right.
And if you're listening, don't go away because Ross is leaving, but we're going to continue talking for a little bit.
The spicy stuff.
Spicy stuff, right? Yeah,
Now
exactly.
he's not gonna get canceled.
Yeah, yeah,
All right, take care, guys. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
yeah.
Hope you enjoyed the podcast so far. To listen to the rest of it, please go to conversation.substack.com.
Two minds met on a summer's eve, each with truths they long believed. Words flowed like a winding stream as hours passed in deep debate. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. In listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. They spoke of justice, spoke of change, of history's weight and future's range. Their views at first seemed worlds apart, but patience bridged the divide. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. They spoke of justice, spoke of change, of history's weight and future's range. Their views at first seemed worlds apart, but patience bridged the divide. It's not about who's wrong or right, but understanding others' light. In civil discourse we can find the ties that gently bind. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. As dawn broke soft on dewy grass, they smiled and shook hands at last. Two souls enriched by reason talk, united in respect. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. This folk song captures the essence of a long, thoughtful discussion between two public intellectuals. It emphasizes the power of patient listening, mutual respect, and the discovery of common ground. The gentle tone reflects the common understanding they reach after their debate. Would you like me to expand on any aspects of